Will the government forcing through the vote of confidence in Tánaiste Simon Harris today diffuse the risk of a debate on children's health policy and disability rights during the final week of the presidential campaign? Hildegarde, David and Mick are all still with me. It was a kind of a comprehensive victory, if we'll describe it that way. Was it a waste of time, Hildegarde, what we saw in the Dáil today?
Well, I don't think it achieved anything in relation to improving services for children. I've just outlined previously what government is doing, particularly Minister Jennifer Carroll McNeill, in relation to the work around CHI and improving the processes and culture and systemic issues that apply there. This was really just a political stunt by Aontú, and I think it was a distraction and basically time wasting. What we want to do as a government is to work on legislation through the Dáil time. We have a lot of important legislation that we want to put through the Dáil, and I think spending time on that today, and he got an overriding, I suppose, majority confidence vote today. I don't think it achieved anything. It
was an overriding majority, David, wasn't it? You'd have to accept that.
But out in the real world, if you ask people, have they confidence in Simon Harris, I would say no, because Simon Harris was the person that we spoke about earlier who gave that solemn...
Yeah, but what we saw in the Dáil today was a waste of time, wasn't it?
Well, if you let me finish first, he gave that promise to children that was cruelly broken. He established Children's Health Ireland, which has now been wound down because of all of the controversies. And he signed off on a bill-as-you-go contract for the National Children's Hospital that has cost the taxpayer billions of euro and 16 completion dates which have come and gone. So while Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil might pat themselves on the back and pat Simon Harris on the back, I would say that people...
But how are any of those issues improved by going through something with such a foregone conclusion?
I would argue that political accountability is important. The Dáil is one of the few places, of course, that can happen. There is always a place for confidence motions, no confidence motions. We actually asked yesterday through Mary Lou MacDonald, and we put an amendment to the order of business, that the issue of scoliosis and spina bifida would be debated in the Dáil today. The government refused to accept that. And then late last night, to get ahead of a no confidence motion by Aontú, then cynically tabled a motion of confidence. So that was cynical from my perspective. That was a waste of time from the government's perspective. What they could have done is actually had that debate on scoliosis and spina bifida, because if they were serious about solutions, they would be listening to the opposition. So this is a government, by the way, that doesn't like accountability, and particularly Simon Harris, who's never taken responsibility for any of those failures. Children's Hospital, somebody else's fault. Children with scoliosis, spina bifida, a promise he made, somebody else's fault.
You have Sinn Féin has time every single week. You have time every Tuesday to have a debate on whatever you want. And that's very clear, and you're told that repeatedly. I used to be the government chief whip, so I know what Mary Butler would have said in those meetings as well.
I don't need to be told
you have
anything.
time.
I know how
no,
the
well,
Dáil works.
I have to tell you, because you don't seem to understand. You don't seem to understand the scheduling of the Dáil. What I want to say here is we had a general election.
There's government time as well.
You had a really good run there, David. We had a general election last year, and we are in government, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, with independence. That is accountability. That is accountability, going to the people. We have our health committees, our Oireachtas committees, the PAC. We have who will hold our ministers and our government to account as you should. But what happened today was a political stunt. Yes, when somebody puts down a motion of no confidence, it is the government's priority to put down a motion of confidence. That's what had to happen today. You can schedule your time in relation to anything you want. We do not stop you doing that.
Well, you tell me where Simon Harris and when Simon Harris has accepted responsibility for what happened with the National Children's Hospital. You talked about me interrupt. Let me put the question. When has he ever accepted responsibility for the fiasco that is the National Children's Hospital? When has he ever accepted responsibility for what happened in Children's Health Ireland? He established it, scandal after scandal.
You voted for it? Sinn Féin voted for CHI?
And when has he ever accepted responsibility for the promise that he gave?
You voted. Sinn Féin voted for the establishment of CHI. I'll answer your question.
And we had 7 years of pointing out all of the failures. You ignored all of them.
I'll answer your question. I was very clear earlier, and I'll say it again. Simon Harris, when he was Minister for Health, got advice from the HSE and clinicians that these surgeries could be done within 4 months. That was incorrect. But he's not a clinician. You're not a clinician.
I'm talking about taking responsibility. Again, you're blaming somebody else, blaming the clinicians. It's not Simon Harris's fault.
I'm telling you the advice. Would you stand up in the Dáil and give clinical advice in relation to anybody? That is not your role.
I tell you what I would do. If I gave a commitment to children with scoliosis and spina bifida,
You're not the clinician.
I would make sure the resources were put in. I would make sure that the treatment abroad option that your government scrapped would have been maintained. So again, excuse after excuse. Blame everybody else, clinicians, staff. but not the minister who made the promise and broke it.
I don't want to talk over you. The treatment abroad system is underway. I again made reference to this. Minister Carol McNeill is looking at how that can be increased and why more are not being treated abroad. Again, she is not a clinician. I am not a clinician. With the best will in the world, we might want to say this child may need a surgery. You know, in relation to growth spurts, in relation to how fast things can change with somebody, with the child with scoliosis, and that is that it has to be clinically led in relation to what intervention is needed at a required
Kieran,
time.
I'm not at all disputing that obviously there are clinical decisions that have to be made.
You seem to want politicians to take
I don't need to be
decisions.
lectured by anybody.
That's what you're saying.
Do you accept that Simon Harris didn't dream that target up off the top of his head? That was on foot of a clinical report that he had been provided with?
Of course, and Simon Harris went and saw
it. So if you were Minister for Health, would it be common practice for you to ignore these clinical reports the HSE would be providing you?
The central point here. That advice was given on the back of capacity and resources that had to be put into the system. So I spoke to the former head of the HSE, by the way, who put that together, and he could not explain why the treatment abroad option suddenly stopped. He could not understand why the resources that were committed were never put in place. Remember that it was Stephen Donnelly, by the way, who put the 16 or 17 million in only a number of years ago. Simon Harris was minister. Never put the money in. So all of these promises were made, and despite all of the so-called urgency. So I'm not saying that politicians have to make decisions that are clinical, but I do say that when you make promises that you'll put resources in and you don't do it, when you have children who are in pain, then I think you should accept responsibility. But it seems that Simon Harris is allergic to it.
Yeah, we know now resources were put in, but there are also, and we're finding this out now, and it's very clear through talking to parents, through advocacy groups as well, that there are systemic and cultural issues as well, that it's not just about money at it. And that is where this inquiry is really important, and that's why the Sláinte Care commitments around, at the moment now, there's a commitment that within 3 months you will be seen, a child will be seen by a clinician, and 3 months after that there will be an intervention. An intervention is a key word here because it may not be surgery. Again,
but is it not true though
there.
as well, Hildegarde, that this isn't the only time that Simon Harris has made a promise and hasn't backed it up with the necessary resources in terms of health? And I'm talking about cervical check, when he stood up in the Dáil and said every woman in the country is going to get a repeat cervical smear, go and get it done now. And the entire system ground to a halt because of that promise. He's kind of want to say something to get him out of whatever happens to be in the headlines there and then.
I think it's important. I have the utmost respect for Simon Harris. As Minister for Health, he led the way in a number of areas right across the health system.
But that promise ground that system to a halt.
Yeah, because the demand went up. And sometimes...
And the demand went up because of what he said.
And you could say that across every government department, when the demand goes up, the capacity can't be there to meet it. OK, that's just a reality, and we can give lots of examples from... I don't want to be equating it to other things that are not as serious. But my point is, he has always been committed. He has invested in healthcare systems. He has put his hand up in relation to that this was the advice that he got from the HSE. He acted in good faith. He spoke in good faith. That the HSE got that.
Everybody's fault, bar
In fairness, he did more than speak in good faith. He made a commitment that he wasn't in a position to make. He may well have got advice to the effect that this was possible, that this could happen. He went further than that. He was under the spotlight, he was under pressure, and he made a promise that simply he could not keep. And there has to be a political price for that. And I think that was what happened today. We see a scenario whereby somebody, a motion of no confidence is taken. It's a source of embarrassment. What is slightly unusual in this case is that the minister has moved on from the portfolio he was in when the issue occurred. Of course, we have to remember also that I think there's a motion of no confidence that precipitated the 2020 general election when he was Minister for Health at the time as well. No, I'm not saying that's specifically a reflection on Simon Harris, but it's certainly a reflection on the type of problems that arise within health. And anybody who has any experience in that area knows you do not make that kind of commitment, particularly when what you're talking about is children who are in pain and their parents, and what you're actually saying to them. And the impact of that is far worse than might otherwise be the case.
You can only go on the advice. I hear what you're saying, Mick, but you can only go on
the commitment. It's advice.
A commitment based on advice from, and we can go around in circles on this, but this is the truth, from the HSE and from clinicians. And whether that was possible or not, You have to. We're not doctors. We're not clinicians.
So you say that's your advice? You say it's possible under that advice. You don't give a specific commitment.
You go back to the clinical expertise and you ask them, this is a huge problem. What can we deliver?
Kieran,
what targets can we reach?
Nobody promised them they'd deliver.
It wasn't the doctor.
It
wasn't the doctor who signed off on the contract for the National Children's Hospital. It wasn't doctors or clinicians that oversaw a build-as-you-go contract that has now cost this state billions and 16 cost overruns. Those very children we're talking about should be, at this point, being treated in the new National Children's Hospital.
And they will
Minister,
but if you keep...
You're talking about accountability and blaming everybody else, the HSE, clinicians and everybody else for decisions that Simon Harris made. He signed that contract. In fact, he was given the opportunity to get out of that contract.
He didn't, but David, he didn't draft that contract.
But his job is to make sure that the contract is robust. We can't hold the contractor to account. The legal levers are not there.
We are holding the contractor. We are holding the contractor to account. We are holding the contractor to account. That the minister is in regular contact with the board of the National Children's Paediatric. It is 99% complete. This state of the art. You don't want it to open. You will be very happy if this state of the art, once in a lifetime, in a generation hospital that will be digitally advanced, a modern hospital for sick children all over Ireland, when you or I are well gone. This is our focus now. This is the Minister for Health's focus. It's the Tánaiste's focus. It's government's focus to move forward now and to make sure that this hospital functions. If I can just complete what I'm saying, that this hospital is world class. We have fantastic clinicians right across this country, and I'm very conscious as I speak that healthcare people listening in feeling very demoralised because they're doing great work. It's a small area that needs to be radically reformed.
When's it going to open?
And that is the focus of this government.
Missed another deadline this week. I think deadline number 16. This
is BAM that have to live up to their commitments of this contract. It's 99% complete. 1% of this hospital before it is substantially completed, and then there'll be a 9-month commissioning by CHI who go in there and make sure that it is ready.
But Kieran,
to be opened.
the Minister can make smart aleck comments about me. I want the Children's Hospital opened, of course I do. She can blame Sinn Féin, she can blame the HSE, she can blame everybody else. But the reality is that it wasn't me as Minister for Health who signed the contract.
You don't want any responsibility. Fine, you're not in government,
and leave
that's
me
fine.
Speak. With respect, you have to allow people to make a point without continuously interrupting. I wasn't the Minister, Simon Harris was. And if I was the Minister that signed the contract that cost this state billions, if I was the Minister that made a commitment to children that I broke, or set up CHI that they then had to wind down, I can tell you I wouldn't be in my job, that's for sure.
How much of this today was about, and not to question the sincerity of anybody who's talking about the parents or anything, I'm not for a moment, but how much of this today was actually about politics and was in the context of a general election or a presidential election?
It's always about politics. Any vote of confidence is always about politics. But as I said, I don't think Simon Harris could complain about the fact that there would be a vote of confidence on the basis of that commitment that he made, an unequivocal commitment. AN2, I suspect, wanted it next week, which would be a few days before the presidential election. So they call Fine Gael cynical in bringing it forward. Equally, you could say it was cynical to lay it down for a few days before the election as well. Whether or not we're going to have to go through something of, at this stage, would be a charade, which is a vote of confidence in the government next week. I think again, we're going to announce that one way or the other tomorrow, whether they want to advance.
Is he as exposed, Simon Harris, when it comes to the National Children's Hospital? It is his name on the contract, and most people would accept there was issues with the contracts. But the point I put to David, I mean, no Minister for Health is going to sit down and draft a contract like that. Yeah. He's signing that on foot of the advice of experts.
Look, to be fair to Simon Harris on that score, the Children's Hospital was in deep trouble before he ever came along. And it has been in deep trouble since. And it is a monument to how not to do a major piece of infrastructure in terms of your relationship with the contractor from the word go and at the various points of what commitments are made. The thing was It is. I think it's the most expensive hospital possibly in the world.
That's not true.
At this stage.
That's not true.
It's not far off at Hildegarde Naughton. It's gone from 600 million to 2+ billion. That's a huge.
It's not the most expensive one in the world.
From 600 million. And whether there's a hospital somewhere else in Singapore or whatever, I don't know. But it sure as hell ain't value for money.
Can I just say?
It's a monument to Fine Gael's failure.
Well, let's talk about Sinn Féin and your children's hospital up in Belfast. That is well over budget. It is per square metre for the price of a bed in your children's hospital in Belfast. So don't start talking about government down here.
More distraction from the government. Remember that it was
facts. You can't run a health service up the north. So don't come down here and start telling us.
Obviously, the minister doesn't like anybody else on the panel having any say whatsoever.
Well, you're well able to interrupt her as well. You're well able to interrupt her.
Let me have my say.
Go on.
It was a PwC report that exposed the litany of failures in that contract, and it was on Simon Harris's watch. In fact, if you remember in 2020, there was going to be a motion of no confidence in Simon Harris, and that brought on the general election. So it wasn't just about the legalities of a contract. It was about the design flaws in the contract. It was a build as you go. We've had all of those design changes since. So this was an absolute disaster. Of course, Leo Varadkar has to take responsibility. Of course, Simon Harris does, the government as a whole.
And what about Sinn Féin up in the north with your children's hospital in Belfast that is well over
That's simply not the case.
It is the case.
We need to ensure we get value for money.
Parliamentary oversight has determined that here.
2.2 odd billion euro is a huge amount to pay for a children's hospital. If it does what it says on the tin, it'd be money well spent, wouldn't it, David?
Of course I want a children's hospital built, but after all of the years of all of the crises, to then put to me that somehow, because I'm critical of what has been an absolute disaster, that I don't want to see children treated in the hospital. I would love if children were getting treatment in that hospital now. I'm asked all of the time on programmes, when is the hospital
But if it opens and if it functions and if it reduces waiting lists, if it does everything that clinicians and the HSE and Children's Health Ireland and the government all hope it does, would you accept 2.2 billion is actually good value for money?
I don't believe that a waste of taxpayers' money is ever good value. I don't believe that all of the cost overruns, by the way, many of those came because of problems with the main contractor and the contract itself. So, of course, I'll never accept that a flawed contract signed off by a minister who signed off on a flawed contract and cost this state billions is ever in the taxpayers' interest. The
contractor dispute whether they were responsible for some of those cost overruns. We'll let them duke it out in the necessary forum. We're going to leave it there.